With the most expensive fares in Europe, there's no denying that travelling by train in Britain is bloody expensive. And with an election coming up, you'd hope that our politicians would have some answers. Well, Labour believe that it's the private train companies that are at fault, as they've announced that if they get into power next year, they would allow the government to compete with these companies, suggesting that the government could do a better job. However, the Conservatives staunchly believe that the private companies are doing a good job and the government could only end up costing us more. Well, to get to the bottom of this debate, I am joined by Paul Rowain, a Conservative and a signalling engineer, and Jordan Hearn, a member of the Labour Society here in the University of Nottingham. And together, I hope that by the end of this video, you'll know whose policy you prefer. Well, I'm going to jump on a train in about 20 minutes. If you've got the time, you can come with me and we'll find out what the arguments are. Right, well, just while we're waiting for the train, let's bring everyone up to speed with how it all works. Network Rail, owned by the government, runs the tracks, and the trains are operated by private companies, such as Cross Country, who won franchises set by the government. A franchise enables one company to run a route for a set number of years without competition. The company that promises to pay the most money over the franchise wins the contract. Well, here's our train, let's jump on. So Network Rail owns the tracks and private companies compete to run the trains. Our debate centres on this competition. Depending on whose side you're on, it either works or it doesn't. Jordan thinks that it doesn't. Given private companies' excessive profits, he sees that there is not enough competition.
There's about £1 billion of wastage in private sector operations of the railways, and that comes from things like dividend payouts to shareholders and inefficiencies because the railway has been segmented and fragmented.
Jordan says Labour's policy to allow government to compete with private train companies is so good because it forces everyone to keep costs low.
The government has to bid for the franchise alongside private companies, so they still have to display that they're going to have those efficiencies and cost effectiveness.
Paul disagrees, arguing public inefficiencies could be larger than private profit.
The problem we had when British Rail was running the railways is that you've got civil servants and politicians who constantly got conflicting ideas, and every time there was a change of government, there'd be a change of policy, change of spending, and the railways were always seen as a problem. Whereas since we've introduced the private sector into the railways, we've opened the door to this whole world of expertise, innovation, and above all investment. But it's also actually helped to bring efficiency savings in because we've got people running the railways who've got expertise and know what they're doing, rather than politicians who might not know how to run the railways.
Paul argues private innovation has removed entrenched inefficiencies and kept the cost of running the railway lower in the face of a massive increase in passenger numbers. There have been examples where this isn't the case. For example, in 2009, National Express won the East Coast Main Line, only to go bankrupt 2 years later, as they could not afford the terms that they once agreed to. Not only that, once nationalised, it performed very well under the government.
Since it was taken into public ownership, it's returned over £1 billion to taxpayers, and that's more than Virgin's West Coast main line has returned in the last 15 years. So it's actually been the best performing of all the franchises, and yet the government now, for some reason,
has privatised it. Does this failure justify Labour's policy?
Well, since franchising was introduced, there have been over 40 franchises awarded, and only 3 of those have ever collapsed, 2 of which were both on the East Coast. So firstly, I appreciate you weren't asking about nationalisation, but firstly, there's a lot of people who say, particularly in the Labour Party, that that's grounds to renationalise the industry. But out of 40 contracts that have been awarded, I don't think 3 failures are enough to sort of warrant that, especially that given that in the case where those 3 companies defaulted on their contracts, it cost those companies a great deal, both financially and in terms of their reputation, but it didn't cause any disruption to services, it didn't cause any disruption to passengers, and it didn't result in any job losses.
So on the whole, franchising motivates companies to keep costs low, as the risk of failure is very real. Oh, wow, what a great and tiring day full of trains. That's my favourite type of day. And I hope you learn, at least from this video, how easy it is to argue both sides. That is exactly why there is a debate. There are no right answers. It all depends upon your own assumptions. If you believe that the government is inherently inefficient, then the Conservatives will be speaking sense. Whereas if you believe that train companies make too much profit, the Labour policy is for you. Well, that's me done. It's now up for you to decide what side of the tracks you stand on.